Hello everybody and welcome back to Wacky Wednesday. My name is Michael and this is my good friend Pongo and this is my other good friend Simba, and Seal is not with us today. So the question for today is this. It's how were the people before Jesus saved? How were they saved? How did they get to heaven? And so that's our question for today. But first, I want to remind you all that if you have a question, something you want to ask, then tell your parents and say, I have a question, and send that through to me, and then I'll pick one of them. And if your question gets on Wacky Wednesdays, tell your parent, there's my question, I need a marshmallow or a treat or something. And so don't forget to send your questions through. So our question today, how were the people before Jesus saved, and how did they get to go up to heaven? So we're in Romans chapter 3 verse 25, because that gives us the answer. It actually tells us how that would have worked. So in Romans chapter 3 verse 25 it says this: God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood. So Jesus died as a way for us to be forgiven, to be received by faith. And so we trust in him to receive that forgiveness. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his patience he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. So God was patient and waited. He waited and waited until Jesus came to punish all the sins beforehand. So what this means is, see, I'm going to put Simba there, and I'm going to put Pongo over there. That's good. Yeah, Simba, let's sit you up. There you go. So Simba's going to be a picture of the people before Jesus. I'm going to be a picture of when Jesus came, and Pongo is going to be a picture of us today, people after Jesus. So how are we today saved? We're saved by looking backwards at Jesus and trusting in the promise. God promised if you trust in Jesus who died on the cross, you'll be forgiven. And so we look backwards and we trust in Jesus, and we trust in Jesus, and then we know when we die, we're going to go up and be with God forever. That's how we're saved, by looking backwards at Jesus and trusting in him. So now what about the people before Jesus? So I'm a picture of when Jesus came. What about the people before Jesus, when Jesus hadn't come yet? How were they saved? So it's actually in the same way. It was in the same way. They looked not backwards, but forwards to Jesus. They looked forwards. Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? He's coming. He's coming. God's King is coming. And we're going to trust in the promise that God's King is coming. And if they held on to that promise, the promise that God made, that my King is coming, my King is coming, they held on to that promise, and then God waited for all their sins. He waited, he held their sins, and then he put their sins on Jesus when he came. So that by trusting in the promise that Jesus was coming, they could be forgiven and be with God when they died. Now I'm going to give you a picture of this. It's kind of like when I was at school. My parents would drop me off at school, and there would be the promise, right? The promise the parents make, I'm going to pick you up after school. That's a promise. Wait for me at school and I'll come pick you up. And so it's going to be me. I was there after school and I'm waiting for my parents. I'm waiting for my parents. But they're not coming. Something's wrong. They're late. So I wander off to the office and I say, my parents aren't here. Was there a phone call or a message? And the teacher says, yes, there was a message. Your parents phoned me to say that they're running late, but they're on their way. They're on their way, just keep waiting. And so what did I have to do? I had to trust in the promise that my parents were on the way. And by trusting in that promise, eventually my parents arrived, they picked me up, and they took me home. And that's the same for the people in the Old Testament. God had sent promises through people called prophets, who were kind of like, they answered the phone from God and told the people what God had to say. And they said, God says his king is coming. His king is coming. Trust the promise that his king is coming. Wait for him. Trust the promise that his king is coming and wait for him. So the people before Jesus trusted in the promise that God's king was coming, and so they waited for him, and they waited for him, and they waited for him. And some of them died trusting the promise, and so they went up to heaven. Others kept waiting and waiting, and some more died and went up to heaven and kept waiting until eventually Jesus was there, and they got to see Jesus and believe in him. And then when they died, they also went up to heaven. So those people are in heaven with God right now. And so that's the answer to how the people before Jesus were saved. They were saved in the same way that we are saved, by trusting in Jesus. The difference is we look backwards at Jesus and trust in him, and that's how we're saved. But they looked forwards to the promise of Jesus coming and trusted in that promise, and that's how they were saved. And so that's the answer to how the people before Jesus were saved. Well, thank you guys. That's all from Pongo and from Simba and myself. Ooh. And so don't forget to send in your questions, and if they get on Wacky Wednesdays, remember to ask your parents for your treat. Well, that's all for us. Say bye, Pongo. Say bye, Simba, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.